Hello and welcome to the Art of Engineering podcast. I'm your host, Chad Hardin, chair of the ASE Orange County Branch Structural Engineering Institute. You can visit us online at www.taepodcast.com. So this show explores the evolution of a career in engineering and also promotes engineering outreach in STEM or STEAM in schools, as well as just the overlap of art and engineering. And I'm really excited because today we have space journalist Leonard David, who's been reporting on space activities for over 50 years and is the author of Mars, Our Future on the Red Planet, which is to be published by the National Geographic later this month in October, and a companion to a 6-part Mars television series produced by the National Geographic with Ron Howard and Brian Grazer, and that's coming out in November 2016, this year. So excited to have you on this podcast, Leonard.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you and your audience. I'm looking forward to it.
And I'll post your links. You have a website. It's www.leonarddavid.com. And as well as a link to the book on Amazon, and also a link to some upcoming appearances, one at the Griffith Observatory in California on 10/28, and as well as the Mission Viejo Library, which is close to my home, 10/27. And where else is your tour taking you?
Well, we're going to go to Google LA. I'm doing a talk at Northrop Grumman, the aerospace company, and there's a couple of surprise things happening in New York City next week, so it's going to be a real adventure.
Right. I wanted to also, just before we go too far, I wanted to list a couple accolades too, just to let our audience know that Leonard is the first recipient of the American Astronautical Society Ordway Award for Sustained Excellence in Spaceflight History in the category of journalism, and the 2010 winner of the National Space Club Press Award. And you're also currently a Space.com Space Insider columnist. So you really know everything there is to know about space, I would gather.
Well, I think every day it's a surprise. You never think that you know it all, and I'm far from that. It's just there's so many real things happening. I mean, just yesterday, the Europeans attempted a Schiaparelli landing craft to try to get it on the surface, and something went wrong. So we're back to Mars is hard.
Right.
It's not easy to get there and perform as expected. So things are happening in real time.
Right. Well, and I was able to get an advanced copy of the book, and it is just fantastic photos, probably in the way that probably only the National Geographic could present. I mean, they're just beautiful pictures from the missions and orbiters to Mars, as well as artist renditions. And it covers so many topics about our travel to Mars that are necessary to be advanced. You've got hero profiles of scientists and engineers involved in advancing space travel. You've got topics on, I'll list these, and I'm probably missing half of them, but architecture, sociology, history of spaceflight, agriculture, hazards that have to be overcome, transportation, geology, meteorology, housing, construction, terraforming. I mean, it's a very comprehensive volume of what's been done, the current research, as well as, I think, from the perspective of we've gotten to Mars and now we're looking back at what did Earth have to do to get there.
I learned a lot myself, and when you assemble that kind of thing, and I think going into the book, one of the things if I have to say I'm proud of a couple of points in there, is I didn't really want to spend the book talking about just modules on Mars and cramming some people in there and letting them peek out the windows. I mean, there's so much sociological, physiological, psychological activities that are going to have to be overcome, or at least we have to be much more aggressive on research. And the main point is really, surviving on Mars is one thing, thriving on Mars is another.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we sustain people there for a long period of time? If settlement, larger outposts are going to happen, colonizations, whatever words you want to use. We've
Mm-hmm.
got to deal with the planet because it's going to deal with us.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the parts that really interested me as a structural engineer was the habitats and how are those going to be built. And it seemed like the theme was that the habitats would have to be somewhat molded to the landscape and expandable. So you get there, and then you can survive, but then future missions should build on the previous units, and more expandable seemed to be the theme. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a very important point. I'm glad you picked that up because that's the key thing is getting the early habitation modules down there. We'll have limited ability to move from those and explore. Eventually, when you have more transportation devices, you can expand the exploration zone around those habitats. But one thing that's, I think, a really good thing to watch is the whole idea about 3D printing and construction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the other kicker in there is really watching us know more about what's available on Mars for construction purposes and molding the resources available into drinking water or even breaking it down for fuel, for propulsion.
Right.
But then you have all the resources that are on the planet that you can fabricate into domes and other kinds of structures. And we're getting there. I didn't want to make it sound like a slam dunk, but it's clear when you look at some of the construction ideas that people have down here already and some of the experiments that are underway. That seems like that's going to play a role in the future of Mars.
Yeah, talking about the resources that are on Mars, one of them that really stuck out to me in the book was perchlorate, which was a double-edged sword because it was an endocrine disruptor,
Yep.
as well as a compound for rocket fuel. So,
yeah, perchlorates we use every 4th of July, but breathing that material that's pervasive on Mars is something that people are worried about, and it's one of those we're going to have to tackle. It also, is kind of in the search for life question, how toxic is the top side of Mars versus underneath that coating. And perhaps I'm a firm believer that there is life on Mars, and it's, as we point out in the book, it could very well be in pockets underground.
Right. Other hazards that have to be overcome are the cosmic radiation and then maybe microbes that we don't know about. One question I was thinking, and I don't know if anybody's looking into this, maybe a dumb question, but could microbes be used or engineered to use the perchlorate as a food source and then help the settlers there?
Yeah, I think there are people looking at that, and I think I think. To be honest with you, I wrote so much, and I have probably another book that's laying on the ground here with all the. One of the things that I kind of looked at and that look really promising. There are some people telling me about microbes that have some economic beneficial possibility, and it's hard to say until we really get on the surface of Mars and do the proper exploration whether some of the microbe, colony might have some benefit down here on Earth. So I think it's a TBD, but again, you got to get to the red planet and understand what it's telling us.
Well, and I think there's so much in the book. There's science, if you're interested in science. There's the hero profiles, which I really enjoyed about the scientists and engineers. And the one that really stood out to me was the profile of Mark Kelly, who was the twin astronaut. I didn't even know about the twin component, where they were measuring how space affected his body versus his twin, who was a retired astronaut. That was very interesting.
Yeah, those papers have yet to come, because I think both of them are still undergoing medical, analysis, and having a control person on the ground as a twin was a unique experiment in its own right. So right. NASA's doing that, and you know, Mark Kelly and Scott Kelly, I mean, the two of them working this out, I think, laid a impressive, kind of breakthrough, ground-breaking kind of medical footnote on how we're going to get to Mars and what are the problems. I mean,
right.
it's the idea here in the book. I didn't want everybody to walk away and say, "Oh, this is going to be easy."
Right. No, I think that definitely comes through.
Yeah.
And I think,
but the challenge of Mars, in some ways, I think Mars is a metaphor for a lot of things: exploration, but also mystery and stick-to-itness, and trying to solve some of the things that the planet's going to throw at the human being there.
Mm-hmm.
And we will prevail. I mean, we prevail in every other part of our planet, whether it's polar, desert, underwater, you name it. This planet is very accessible now, and centuries ago it wasn't. So I see that for Mars.
And you recently wrote an article on Scientific American, which it's I'll put a link to that in the podcast page.
Right.
But it's Scientific American, published October 18th. Blue Planet, Red Planet Politics: Obama's Giant Leap for Legacy. And to that human ingenuity you were speaking to, you quoted President Obama, and if I can read the quote here, he was talking about his favorite movie last year was The Martian, and I'm quoting your article. He added that he is predisposed to admire any movie where Americans dare the odds and motivate the world. But what really grabbed me about, and then this is President Obama's quote, but what really grabbed me about the film is that it shows how humans, through our ingenuity, our commitment to fact and reason, and ultimately our faith in each other, can science the heck out of just about any problem. I love that quote.
Yeah. Well, I think he hit on a theme there that I think when The Martian, with all the issues that he dealt with, Watney on the planet, I mean, it was, surmounting all that. Not only, the astronaut on Mars, but also the teamwork that had to happen. And that's a signature, not only for America, but I mean, this is a global enterprise in a lot of ways. So there are teams all over the world, whether it's in China, Europe, Japan, other countries now are really. India is coming on very strong in their space programs, and it's a leadership thing. It's a teamwork. It's also figuring out how are we going to cooperate and collaborate.
Right.
And that's a theme that I tried to strike in the book.
Yeah, well, I think that comes through in the book and as well as the article. That seemed to be that the bottom line was that, from your article, was that if NASA truly wants to make it to Mars, it will probably need to enlist international technology, expertise, and funding. So it definitely is going to have to be an Earth effort, right? Yeah,
well, Mars, the future of our red planet, and how we're going to explore it. I see it as a global undertaking, if it's going to be a sustainable one. We could, default position would be to kind of do the Apollo program, where it's flags and footprints. You run around, you get some rocks, and you throw some experiments out, and then you hightail it out of there.
Mm-hmm.
The Apollo program is a legacy moment in humanity's history, but it also shows, political history where the program got cut off in 1972, and there was some incredible growth that was going to happen with lunar, and then even then Mars. They were using the capabilities of Apollo to get to Mars. So, politics does play a major part of this, and again, not just American politics, but if it's a global initiative, it is something like the International Space Station. That's why they got international in there. There's 16, 17 nations that have contributed to that facility, and that's an engineering feat in its own.
Right.
I mean, in some ways, you can look at the station. We landed on Mars, but we landed in low Earth orbit, and look how the capabilities that had to be brought to bear to install that huge facility. and make it operable. And you got people took off the other day and en route to the space station. I mean, it's been a bit of a bus stop there for a lot of nations to come and go.
Right. Yeah, maybe our greatest international engineering achievement, I would say.
Yeah, I think, every nation to me has got a cultural hook to it that is going to provide something that we perhaps collectively will think through some of these issues and come up with solutions. So I find it fascinating to watch our nations strive to get to Mars. It used to be a big deal to throw a satellite into Earth orbit. Now it's like, that's ho-hum. And now it's the march back to the moon or onward to Mars. So, it's a multi-international, multicultural undertaking.
It was funny timing-wise. I was reviewing the book and then as well as the article, and I just happened to read this quote in your book from Charles Bolden, the administrator of NASA. A new consensus is emerging in the scientific and policy communities around our vision, timetable, and plan for sending American astronauts to Mars in the 2030s. More and more of our neighbors are finding new meaning in the words "Mars matters." And then I was reading your article, and it's all about President Barack Obama is actually wrote sending humans to Mars by the 2030s and returning them safely to Earth, somewhat making a commitment similar to the first commitment from President Kennedy to get to the moon, right? So it's a pretty...
there's some of that. I think there will be a moment there where globally we might have to have a Kennedy-esque, let's go to the moon. And I don't know, a bit on the historical side. I mean, Kennedy was actually making some overtures with the Soviet Union then of doing it collectively, together. That kind of got lost in the history books, but it's there. And, we did a go it alone. But again, when you think about how many engineers come from all over the world and participated in that with either investigation, science experiments, or even training. I mean, some of it was overseas. So it does become sort of a global undertaking. I think there is another kind of a catch-22 to watch, and that's the role of the private sector, and certainly Elon Musk with Tesla and SpaceX and his visionary view of Mars is something to keep an eye on. We'll see what the private sector can contribute to undertaking.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So there's 3 projects out, right? You've got the SpaceX project with Elon Musk. You've got Virgin Galactic. You've got the Mars One project, the Dutch project. Do you have a guess who's going to get there first, or is it going to be NASA?
That's a good one, but that's why it's exciting to not only be alive now, but also watch each of these organizations take on the challenges. And I think Elon Musk is already talking about sort of a private government, some kind of relationship. It's already been struck. There are some Space Act agreements that have been struck between NASA and Elon Musk on his Mars vision.
Okay.
That will be productive for both sides. So we'll see. Elon is a fascinating. I'm old now, and so I looked at Elon's talk in Mexico as sort of a little on the Walt Disney Tomorrowland. When I was a kid, the best adventure you could have in space was through Walt Disney, Tomorrowland and Disneyland, the TV show. These things were in black and white, but yet when Tomorrowland came on, who did he have? He had Werner von Braun describing how we're going to get to Mars and what life would be like on Mars and how hard it was going to be to get across space. And so I looked at Elon's thing as a little bit on the visionary Disney-esque thing, that he's inspirational. On the other hand, a lot of details have got to follow.
Right.
A lot of technical work. You can hand wave yourself into the future, but at some point you got to have a countdown and see if it works.
Right. Well, back to that. When you were a kid, what were your first steps into becoming a science writer?
Well, I grew up. I was born in San Diego, California.
Oh.
My dad was in the Navy. He was a recruiter, and we wound up in Texas. And this is sort of the late '50, mid '50 kind of time frame. And this gets a little bit back to National Geographic. Everybody had National Geographics coming in, and you had your basement full of those books. They were so beautiful you didn't want to throw them away.
Right.
So you always held on to them all. And I think the neighbor gave me a bunch of National Geographics, and actually one of those was a story about V2 rockets being shot off from New Mexico.
Okay.
And they had a camera on the end of the rocket, and it took these incredible pictures of the Earth from 80, 90 miles, 100 miles, whatever the V2, the trajectory was, and it crashed, and the camera was built to survive, and these pictures was one of those fold-outs where you could fold it out from the middle of the magazine, and this is terrific. Look at what you can see from up there.
Right.
And that was pretty inspirational, and kind of a weird tie was I kind of wrote a little newspaper for the neighborhood. It was handwritten. I went around and wrote about space and what was the future may be coming. And
wow.
I sold a nickel. I think I got a nickel for them.
That's awesome.
They're all handwritten sort of communiques about, folded nicely so you look like a newspaper. But I started writing about that at that time frame, and I probably collected all of 75 cents. I don't know.
Wow, that's a wonderful story. I talk with people, and always there's some element that comes full circle. So I think it's really interesting that your imagination would have been sparked by the National Geographic, and now you're back.
It was early, and the other thing that happened, I broke my glasses a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I made telescopes out of the glasses that my parents were buying glasses right and left.
Oh, wow.
So, you take cardboard tubes and you kind of put something together. And so I was making kind of things like that. I got big telescopes, but I consider myself still a really amateur astronomer. We live up here in the mountains in Colorado, and I just like walking out on the deck and looking up and just seeing what's out there.
If I can read one more quote from the book from Buzz Aldrin, and this is: "In the same way that we remember President Kennedy's challenge that motivated us to dream of reaching the moon, the leader of the nation who makes a commitment to land on Mars within 2 decades will be remembered throughout history." And it makes me but wonder, why are we so compelled to pioneer to Mars?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's one that you could have been on the East Coast or with Columbus going, why are we doing this? What's going on here? It's hard to put it down in words. I find I drew some parallels with ocean exploration, which I find some fascinating aspects to. Is that early on, sailors, it was the flat Earth people that the ship would fall off the edge. Mm-hmm. It was sea serpents. It was giant octopus, creatures that we didn't understand that were swallowing up ships.
Right.
And I find, to be honest, a parallel there, because we've got sort of the sea serpents, we've got scurvy, we've got all kinds of issues that need to be overcome, and I think microgravity is one of those. I think we worry about cosmic rays and radiation, and I think we're going to find those are going to be tamed, like the early explorers on the ocean. to go ahead, and they didn't fall off the edge of the Earth. They didn't get swallowed up by serpents, and they missed the whirlpools out there.
That's a beautiful...
So there's some parallels. Now, I'll say that one thing that when I got done and pushed the send button on the book, I think this gets to a time in our own history that I call now history.
Mm.
That there is no time in our past that we can claim that we're just repeating the exploration ethic. There's some of that in there, but at no time in our past have we ever had citizen explorers. We have cameras, GoPro cameras on people climbing mountains. This really, we can all even participate in exploring like we've never. I was just on my internet this morning looking at the latest images from Mars.
Mm-hmm.
That's unique. That's novel. That's something that, as a collective planetary group, that is unique, and that's why I kind of want to emphasize now history. We're creating some history that I think people will look back at, and how the springboard from this today, and our technologies and our worries and our ability to communicate with each other, so different that exploration is going to be very much everybody on board. Everybody can be a pioneer on these things.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like your term, the now history, because I think, and I was reading about this the other day. There's times in Earth's history that are very significant, and you wonder at the time, did the people realize it? And I wonder if it's somewhat of you don't realize it until maybe it's past. And I think it takes somebody pointing out to say, hey, this is a really important moment in history. We're in the next decade or 2 decades, we might be going to Mars. I mean, it's a huge pivotal moment in history.
And it's off planet. It's not even on planet.
Right.
I think there's still history to be made here, but I mean that jump to another world is unique and never been attempted. I like your point though. People only in the future will somebody come back and put some kind of they were in the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
I'm sure somebody back then at that time that we call the Industrial Revolution they weren't sitting in a bar going, how do you like the revolution today? The Industrial Revolution, really impressive.
Right. That's funny.
That's not it. So I think something's coming, and we probably don't appreciate our moment in the sun and in the solar system now as we move on to another world.
Right.
And create this kind of multi-planet species like Elon Musk is talking about, and others.
I love that metaphor that we have the sea serpents to overcome. That's a beautiful metaphor. I have a question, because maybe a very specific question in the book. I didn't recognize this term, and it was the first time I'd seen it. And it's in the book that scientists and engineers are selecting a suitable location to land, and the site should be, to be ideal, the site should be safe to land on, for one, but also have high scientific merit. And also have the potential to answer this question on whether Mars has spawned a second genesis of life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as I put in there, and particularly in Chris McKay at NASA Ames Research Center, one of the leaders, there's a number of Penny Boston at Ames Research Center too, that we talk about whether or not has there been a second genesis. Is there another type of life that is unique to Mars that got settled there, that got there, and perhaps mutated to something because of the lack of, atmosphere and the radiation, and has hunkered down on the planet, and it is a different type of life form. Then you get people saying, in the grand scheme of planetary formation, did Mars get impacted where stuff flew off?
Right.
off of Mars, and you have this kind of panspermia thing where you actually transfer microbes on Mars back to Earth, and maybe it happened from Earth to Mars. So there's a lot of discussion about this, and that's another one of the great mysteries, I think, of getting to Mars and sort of helping to sort that out. But I did write in there, I think the ultimate irony is that we going back to Mars, it's us going back to our home planet.
Right.
We respond off of Mars. What a round trip we've taken.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think I heard somewhere, maybe related to that theory, is that the Mars cycle is for one day is 23 hours, right? And we're obviously 24. So is that some part of that theory?
I think if the first cruise on Mars, they're going to have a life scientist on board, because that is going to be an interesting dynamic of what people are going to be able to go, and what we said there, from the book, you have that exploration zone, and how do you maximize the time of the people there, the equipment that you have to bring to do the research. Also, one of the things I highlighted was the kind of synergy that's going to happen between robots and humans on site, whether it's through gliders, ballooning, or I have a whole thing in there about a little bit about tumbleweeds, that that carry instruments that use the winds of Mars to transfer themselves from point to point.
I thought that was really good. That was a really good. I saw that picture. It was really interesting, kind of mimicking a natural system.
And that is another theme that's in there. I guess maybe the millions of themes, but one of them was using the planet to help you explore, and the winds of Mars are going to be our friend.
Mm-hmm.
We're all worried about dust storms and high velocity particles coming in. I think that's pretty much overblown. That's a pun almost. So I think getting to know Mars is getting to know how you can use that environment in your favor,
right?
Instead of fighting it. We're going to have to again tame Mars in some ways, and drilling on the planet, looking for ice, for the resources. All that's going to have to. You can't give all those instructions to the first crew. That's why it's important to have some build-up of capability little by little and over time, that you can really move out from the exploration zone and take hold of the planet and understand it more.
Well, thank you. And I think just one thing on the theme of the podcast here is the overlap of art and engineering, and I think the book itself is a wonderful representation of that, because you have the beauty of the pictures and the composition and the writing, along with the technical side. What do you enjoy in your what do you do on your free time in terms of art that you enjoy to relax?
I'll be honest with you, and don't tell any editor this, but I'll write a sentence and on the computer, and I'll go, well, that looks okay, and then I go play music for about an hour.
Okay. What kind of music do you enjoy?
Well, I play synthesizer piano, and I play an electric auto harp.
Oh, wow.
And so I frankly, I've been doing that for a long time too, about as long as writing space exploration stories. But just don't tell any editors that I take a lot of breaks.
Okay. I'll make sure not to tell anybody.
Okay.
I read a couple of books just by chance recently, both science-related fiction stories. I was wondering if you read either of these, Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson, or Saturn.
I met Kim Stanley Robinson, and I enjoyed. I was on a panel once with him, and he's great. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a sci-fi reader. Movies, I've got collections of all the early 50s, 60s sci-fi films.
Okay.
Which I really love, but I have a hard time sitting there reading sci-fi, I'll be honest with you, but because I get hundreds of emails a day and sifting through the reality of what's going on in the space program, that's enough.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I can understand that.
But on the other hand, I definitely appreciate the sci-fi kind of interest, and in that book, my Mars book, I really try to again make sure about the ethics of Mars, and also Michael Crichton's book Andromeda Strain. I never read the book. I love the movie, but his whole premise of bringing back some samples from space and having some kind of biological catastrophe, I think we have to be aware of that. We have to realize that Crichton himself was pulling information from his belief that there was some issues there to deal with, and he was clever in writing that book. And along with Jurassic Park and some of the other seminal things that he did before he died.
Right.
Great writer.
Absolutely, and maybe that's one of the hallmarks of science fiction, is that they kind of informs current science and pushes it, and then vice versa. Current science sparks imagination in science fiction writers, and it's kind of a nice cycle.
It is, and it's again, I'm more caught up in the movies, and there's some new ones coming. I'm kind of looking forward to, and we'll see what they do. About contact with alien and intelligences, and Spielberg did a great service of portraying E.T. as not some harbinger of death kind of thing, because most of my life was outer space bad. It's coming to get you.
Yeah, right. Well, I also have some questions from students, 4th and 5th grade students. Do you have a little more time to answer those?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Let's see, a couple of these here. Okay, so this question is, if there is rust on Mars, then does that mean that there was once water and living things there?
I think people are pointing to these recurring slope lineae, which is an awful name, but it's a technical one. And these are these streaks we've found on Mars that seem to be, they're conducive to be thinking about liquid water somehow flowing across Mars. I tried to highlight a couple of research professionals that have been looking at those streaks as, are they indicators of an aquifer system underneath the surface of Mars? Okay. And so, there's definitely in the past on Mars, water was, pretty pervasive. Where did it go, and where is it now? Locked up in ice or subsurface aquifers? We need to get there to find out. Okay. This is a good question. How would the regular public get to Mars, and could people just go and visit? Well, I think in the future, and I think this is the plan that Elon Musk senses, that creating an interplanetary transport system that hauls lots and lots of people. I'm not going to say that can't happen. I mean, why not? It's just another type of transportation system. I think one of the things that we got to get in our mind and not be afraid of is the expansive gulf between the Earth and Mars. I mean, it's a long way away, but new transportation systems are coming. You can see it in the physics literature. You can see it kind of already discussed within NASA itself, of how do you cut that transit time between the Earth and Mars. Some people suggest a week. Buzz Aldrin I work with, he's got his cycling spacecraft. They're almost like a taxi system where you have multiple things where you jump on and get out to Mars on cyclers. Right. So, and when that happens, then everybody is capable of getting into space and moving out to Mars if settlement and colonization is really going to happen in a way that some people envision it. And then this is a good question. How come you chose Mars and not other planets? Are there other viable locations? Well, I think I was asked by National Geographic to focus on Mars, so that's why the book is specific to Mars. But I think we do see the beginnings of interest in the moons of planets, whether it's, Enceladus, Europa in particular around Jupiter. There's some other destinations out there, and I think a young person living on Mars is going to look up in the Martian nighttime sky and wonder what's next.
Right.
I never thought of Mars, the penultimate end of our exploration. We're going to go way beyond Mars.
Right. It's kind of back to that.
I think, one great thing that's happened since I've been around, since your listeners have even been around, maybe even shorter period of time. Look how many exoplanets are out there.
Right.
We're finding them all over the place. And, in my lifetime, I lost Pluto.
Right.
They changed it. But, beyond that is we got the New Horizons spacecraft past Pluto on out. At some point, interstellar travel is coming, and we will be transporting between star systems in the long haul of the future. And some of your readers and listeners are going to be able to participate in that.
Right. Yeah.
We now have destinations out there we see.
Right.
And one of them is pretty close. Alpha Centauri is only 4 1/3 light year away.
How far is it?
Travel at the speed of light. It only takes 4 years to get there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's How long does that? That's another question here. Is how long does it take to get to Mars?
Well, you have the planets go around the sun, and at certain points, that's why you see a salvo of vehicles going from Earth, because Mars gets closer every couple years.
Okay.
So the whole planetary alignment allows you to get there in 6 to 9 months. So it's not a huge amount of time. But once you get there, the planets are moving, so you got to stay put on the planet if you don't want to just sit there and some rocks and come back. So you got to wait for a year or so. For everything to get back in alignment where you might be able to get back. But that has really important consequences about the kind of food you take, and equipment breaks down and you got to fix it, and so it's all part of the real puzzle that's going to have to be sorted out.
Okay. And how fast? So if we're getting there in 6 to 9 months, I guess I could look at what the diameter away from Earth, or the radius that Mars is from Earth, but how fast are we traveling in terms of the speed of light? Is it like 1% even, or?
I don't know. All I know is the escape velocity off the gravity of it. You got to get 25,000 miles an hour.
Okay.
You got to go 17,000 miles an hour to get into Earth orbit, but beyond that, all the Apollo astronauts that went to the moon, they had to reach escape velocity.
Okay. Interesting.
So I've written in the past about escape velocity vacations. I can see them coming.
That's true. Yeah, I know. Whenever vacation's coming up, you got to work really hard to get everything off your desk, and so.
That's right. That's your own escape velocity.
I like that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Leonard. I think I just wanted to mention a couple more of your works here. You're also co-author with Apollo 11's Buzz Aldrin of Mission to Mars, My Vision for Space Exploration, which was released in May 2013, also published by the National Geographic Society. And then, especially for our listeners, there's also a wonderful reference here for information on a career in the space and satellite industry. You have a book, Space Careers, in 2015, co-authored by you as well as Scott Sacknoff. And then this book is designed for high school, college, graduate students, and job seekers of all ages. And it touches on a lot of the topics that we were talking here, but engineering, space science, astronomy, astrophysics, remote sensing, environmental monitoring, communications, software, as well as in policy analysts, lawyers, accountants. There's so many facets for people to get involved in as it relates to their own interests. So I'll put a link to all that in the podcast notes. And I really appreciate your time, and it's been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, and keep your head high and look to the future. It's right there.
Thank you, Leonard.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Art of Engineering. You can find us online at www.taepodcast.com. Thank you, and listen in next time.